Former President Trump was back in Iowa today, his 8th visit to the Hawkeye state in less than a month. The Republican frontrunner holding his very first rally since his former running mate turned opponent, Mike Pence, dropped out of the race. And he picked up more endorsements today. For more on the former president's rally, I'm joined by Niall Stanage, White House columnist with our partner, The Hill. Niall, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Good to be with you, Natasha.
So former President Trump says he thinks Mike Pence should endorse him. Do you see that happening?
I don't really know. The former vice president has been quite critical of the former president, particularly regarding the events around January the 6th, 2021. And I was slightly surprised, actually, that former President Trump was sort of seeking the endorsement because, quite frankly, he doesn't need it. Trump's sitting about 50% or so in the polls. Mike Pence was polling around 4%. I suppose it would be useful as a sort of a stamp of approval, but it certainly wouldn't change anything to do with the fundamental shape of this race.
Does Mike Pence dropping out of the race clearly help any of the other candidates seeking to close the gap with Trump?
Not really, because honestly, the former vice president was not doing well. That's why he had to drop out. It was not just a matter of low polling numbers. He wasn't getting a lot of donors. There was a real question mark over whether he would make the stage for the third debate. I suppose in the biggest sense, Natasha, the more slimmed down the field becomes, the higher are the chances of an alternative to former President Trump becoming a more serious challenger. Right now, you have Trump on one side and all the people who aren't Trump on the other, and those other people are dividing the vote between them. So in a general sense, it does, I suppose, help their chances if someone drops out.
All right, let's look at the other side quickly. Do you think that Dean Phillips can actually make a difference in the Democratic Party, or rather Democratic primary?
Not in the sense of beating President Biden. I don't think there's any realistic chance of that happening whatsoever. I think the difference Dean Phillips can make is to be the embodiment of an argument that President Biden is too old. Dean Phillips makes that argument quite explicitly. And in doing so, I think he fuels doubts among Democratic and independent voters as well as Republicans. And we know those doubts already exist about the capacity of President Biden, the oldest president in history, to serve a second term in an accomplished fashion.
And there also seems to be a bit of a battle brewing between moderate Democrats and their more progressive colleagues over how the White House is handling the war in Israel. Can you clue us in? What do you make of this?
I think there's a fundamental split, really, between the left of the Democratic Party and the centrists best represented by President Biden in how they view the whole conflict, by which I don't just mean the events of the last few weeks, but the whole struggle between Israel and the Palestinians. I mean, basically, people of President Biden's cast of mind in this, I think, see the cause of the conflict as being the failure or refusal of large swathes of the Arab world to acknowledge Israel's existence and the idea that they're working to eliminate it. On the left, it's a completely different story. I think the left sees the causes of the conflict as being issues like Israel's occupation of the West Bank, illegal under international law, human rights violations, and the plight of the Palestinians right now being killed by the hundred in Gaza is something that understandably bothers the left a lot.
Niall, I want to ask you about these numbers. I thought they were really interesting. A Gallup poll from March of this year, we're bringing it up on the screen right now. This is looking at Democratic support for Israel. So again, among Democrats, and it shows this drastic drop from 2001 to this year, 51% sympathies towards Israel and in the Middle East, and only 38% this year. How do you see this divide and the conflict between Israel and Hamas impacting next year's election?
I think it's partly a generational divide where younger Democrats tend, broadly speaking, to be more sympathetic to the Palestinians. In terms of its impact on next year's election, I think there's one really central concrete point to be made, which is in the state of Michigan, which is a swing state, there is a significant body of Arab American and Muslim American voters. We know anecdotally that those voters are very, very unhappy with President Biden's conduct during this most recent conflict. They see it as far too much giving carte blanche to Israel to do what it wishes. And if those voters don't vote, I mean, I don't think they're going over to the Republican side, but if they don't vote, that in itself could have a significant impact on the state of Michigan in 2024.
Okay, Niall Stanage, appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.